Hey, in this video, we're going to be having a look at the thoracic cavity, and let's see what organs are in there, what things are passing through it, and the general structure of it, what's happening. Now, before we go there, of course, we've got to realize that thoracic cavity, a lot of real vital organs are there: heart, lungs, major blood vessels, lymphatics, major nerves passing through there. So we've got to make sure it's nicely protected, and it is protected because we do have the rib cage. Now, I've done videos on things like the sternum, the parts of the sternum, the manubrium, the body, and the xiphoid process, looked at ribs, etc. So they provide some protection to the deeper structures. Plus, we have a lot of muscles associated with it. Things like pectoralis major, we have the intercostal muscles, pectoralis minor, etc. But let's go in and let's have a look at inside, and let's see how it's organized. Now we can see inside the thoracic cavity. Now, where's the thoracic cavity? Thoracic cavity is from here down, and at the bottom there's this large dome-shaped muscle, which is the diaphragm. And once you're down here in the abdominal cavity, we can see that things like the liver and the intestines are down here. But we really want to focus in on what's happening up here. Now let's start with the major organs that we have, and just rotate it around. Over here we have the right lung and we have the left lung. Now, the one thing you don't see here is that the lungs have a double-walled membrane around them, the pleura. There's the one that's right against the lung tissue itself. That's a visceral pleura. Viscera means organ. And on the outside is a parietal pleura. Now, each lung, both the right and the left one, have this double membrane. Now, what's that double membrane doing? It's doing a few things. First of all, the space between the membranes is almost non-existent, but there's slippery fluid in there. And of course, this helps to reduce friction as we breathe. We're always expanding, contracting the lungs. And of course, the lungs are, if you look, they're actually up against the inside of the rib. So there's not a whole lot of space in here. It's a pretty jam-packed place. So the first thing is reduce friction. The next thing is it acts as sort of compartmentalization. It's a bit of a protective feature. You know, think about baggies. You know, we put stuff in baggies to protect them. And that's what it does. That if I have an infection in the middle part of the chest cavity, by the way, this middle strip is called the mediastinum. So if I have an infection in there, it won't directly spread to the lungs because the lungs are within the membrane. And the most important thing that this group of membranes does is that they're attached onto that diaphragm, and they're really associated with the inside of the rib cage. So when the diaphragm contracts when breathing, it pulls the membranes down, and the membranes help to expand the lungs. And that's how we breathe, that I make the container size bigger for the lungs. And if I have a container and make it bigger, and I had some stuff in there like air, but I now all of a sudden make the container bigger, the pressure goes down. And air, as I'm sticking my finger up here toward the nose, air will rush from outside to inside because things move from high pressure to low pressure. How do I breathe out? I let the lungs recoil. And when they recoil, the container gets smaller, has stuff in it, smaller container, stuff in it, pressure goes up, and then pressure will force the air out of here. So pretty simple mechanism. Now when I look at the lungs, they're not equal. Is that the right lung over here actually has 3 lobes. 1, 2, and 3. This is the superior lobe, this is the middle, and this is the inferior. And you can see that they have fissures between them. These are the very deep grooves that separate and demark the different lobes. And this one is the horizontal one, and this one is the oblique. And you see it's running at an angle there. That's the right lung. Let's go look at the left lung. I'm going to turn it here. And all of a sudden you can start to see there's an obvious difference. And that is there's 1, 2 lobes, unlike the right lung where there's 3 lobes. And here I just have the horizontal fissure that breaks the lobes apart. Now that we've looked at the outside surface of the lungs, let's take them out and let's look deeper inside the model. So now what I've done is I've removed the lungs. And now let's get a closer view. So there's one feature I want to show you on the surface of the lungs. Now it's very subtle. There are these very shallow grooves that run along the outside of the lungs. Because remember, the lungs are jammed in underneath the ribs. And we call this an anatomical reflection. Just because it's pushed up there, it's going to leave a bit of an impression there. You can see that there are a number of blood vessels. Now, let me remove the heart. The heart's sitting here. Now, the one thing to also point out is that in the left lung, I have to make a space for the apex. This is it. The pointy bit near the bottom is the apex of the heart. So I have to make space for that. So there's the trachea. Now, if you look carefully, there's these blue horizontal lines. That's trying to represent the cartilage, because around the trachea, now the trachea is the pipe that is going to take air into the lungs and out of it. That's the first major one. And the reason this cartilage is there, now they're cartilaginous rings. Now here's the trachea. They go around the trachea, but they don't go all the way, that in the back there is a space. Now why are these here? They're here because remember how air moves in and out is I'm going to create high pressure and low pressure zones. So we don't want this tube to basically be compressing and opening and compressing and opening all the time. That would do long-term damage to it. So it gives some stability to the diameter of the airway. When it comes to plumbing, the diameter of the airway is a really important feature, and that's a separate video. Now, as we come down here, these cartilaginous rings are here all the way, and then you see that the trachea will break into the primary bronchi, one going to each lung, and then it just keeps subdividing, almost like a tree, and that's why we call it the bronchial tree. And these tubes get smaller and smaller and smaller, so they're really distributed throughout the lung tissue. Now, the very smallest grouping of these tubes we're going to call bronchioles. There's a real difference to the bronchioles when I get down to the small ones. There's many of them, countless of them. But I no longer have that cartilaginous ring around there. And instead, in the wall of that bronchiole, I have a lot of smooth muscle. And smooth muscle allows me to change the diameter. So I can change the resistance to airflow for things going in and things going out. You can also see, based on this model, there's a lot of blood vessels because, of course, the job of the lungs is to do gas exchange, and we're dealing with gas exchange with the blood. So the right side of the heart has pumped blood to the lungs, and that blood is there to gain more oxygen. We often say it's deoxygenated blood, but don't be fooled thinking there's no oxygen in the blood heading to the lungs. There's still a lot of oxygen, just less. And in the lungs, I'm going to add oxygen, and then that blood's going to be sent back to the left side of the heart, and from the left side of the heart, it is distributed to the rest of the body. Now let's see what else is in the thoracic area. Is that throughout the center here, that center area we can call the mediastinum. And the mediastinum has not only the trachea coming down, which bifurcates, but in behind, you can just see it tucked in right there. That is the esophagus. So of course that's the pipe, the muscular pipe that's going to carry food from the oral cavity down into the stomach, which is tucked in right below here. That's the liver. The stomach is hiding behind the liver right here. So the esophagus comes down. Now the esophagus has to get through this big dome-shaped muscle, and of course this big dome-shaped muscle is the diaphragm. And there are holes here for it to get through, and we call them hiatus. So if you ever hear of someone have a hiatal hernia, that's where part of the stomach, or the connection of where the esophagus joins the stomach, has been pushed up through the dome of the diaphragm, through that hole, that hiatus. And a hernia is when something pokes through basically a muscle wall. So that's a hiatal hernia. So we have the esophagus traveling through here. Plus we got major blood vessels. We have the aorta. So the aorta is traveling through the thoracic cavity and will travel through the diaphragm and come down here and become part of the abdominal aorta. Now, that's arterial blood. Venous blood comes back and will travel back through the inferior vena cava and also has to work its way through the diaphragm and will be returned to the heart. Are there anything else passing through here? Yes, they're not quite as obvious in this model, but I do have nerves that are passing through here, and one of them is the cranial nerves. Cranial nerves are 12 pairs of nerves that come off from the brainstem. Now, most of the cranial nerves have to do with stuff up here, sensory or muscle stuff up here, or gland stuff up here. And There is one that travels all the way down here and down the abdominal cavity, and that is the vagus nerve, the vagus, the wanderer. So it has to transit from thoracic down through here, through the thoracic cavity, down into the abdominal cavity. The other thing that we have, which we can't quite see in this model, is lymphatic drainage coming back up. And lymph fluid is fluid that's being out into a tissue that is being recollected in something that looks like veins, but we call them lymph vessels. And that extra fluid is collected and it's brought back up, and the lymph goes through a series of lymph nodes, and there are some deep abdominal lymph nodes in the cavities here, which we can't quite see. And the lymph gets checked for quality, infection, things like that, and then it's returned back to the blood. Now, we can't quite see it here, but that's also happening. So that's a pretty quick overview of the thoracic cavity. We have lots of things happening in there. Now, if this is being of use to you, let me know. Drop me a comment, hit the like button, or subscribe. And if there's any videos you'd like to see in particular, drop me a line and I will try and put it on my to-do list. So, hey, thanks for watching. And wow, the thoracic cavity, it's a busy place.